And good morning and welcome to everyone to today's Rail North Committee consultation call. First and foremost, first item of the agenda is welcome and apologies. But before I take any apologies, it's very appropriate to give a very warm welcome, first and foremost, to Mayor Oliver Coppard. Congratulations on your election as the new Mayor for South Yorkshire. But also, as well, we're welcoming Councillor Mark Ironimo, who's the substitute member for Councillor Ross from Hull City Council. So looking forward to working with you as well, Mark. Are there any apologies we need to note, James or David, at all?
So no more apologies I've got, Chair.
Lovely. I shall take that as read that there aren't any further apologies. Second item is the declarations of interest, and that's just for me to remind all members that if there is anything they are aware of at this moment or at any stage during the meeting that they need to declare appropriately, please indicate so we can make sure that's recorded and dealt with accordingly. The third item is the minutes of the previous meeting, and can those minutes be agreed? I shall take silence as acceptance. So, Heather, do you want to come in with a point?
Yep. Yes, just to say that my apologies weren't recorded for the last meeting. I did put my apologies in.
Okay, if we can correct accordingly, but otherwise, if we're happy with the minutes from the last meeting, that's excellent. And the first substantive item, which is just a quick 5-minute update from David, is the Strategic Transport Plan update. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and morning, committee. Obviously, we're going to talk about a number of operational issues in a few minutes, which are very prevalent at the moment. But as a reminder, the long-term rail strategy, as it was previously called, is something we as a group across the north put together. The first one back in 2015, then 2018, it was refreshed. And that was really important because it set the framework for what we and what you as a committee wanted to see on the rail network. And actually that drove the transformation that was embedded in the former franchises with Transpennine Express and Northern, particularly the new rolling stock, but also the increase in services that they committed to deliver as part of that. Clearly, a lot of things have happened since then, but I think having a 30-year vision, really important. It's actually part of TfN's statutory role to have a strategic transport plan that covers all modes. So it's one of the core things that TfN can do by coming together right across the north to set that vision. So a number of things happened since the last one in 2018, not least the problems around May 18 and infrastructure getting out of kilter with service improvements. But obviously we had COVID, we've had the integrated rail plan published now, we've got the rail reform agenda, and we've had the publication of our ambitious decarbonisation strategy. So all of these need to be factored into the new strategy. We'll also be wanting to build on the strong recovery on rail that we have seen, particularly in the leisure market in the post-COVID environment. And really important that the new strategy will be evidence-led. We've built up a body of evidence across the north now. Transport for the North has developed a whole analytical framework, brought land use planning in to look at the impact of changes in transport and improvements in transport on land use and therefore further economic growth. We've got work on transport and social exclusion, which I know has been something very important to the committee that, again, we'll want to embed into the revised strategy. I think focusing on the passenger experience is more important than ever. That has always been central to the strategy, but also cost effectiveness, ensuring that the resources that we have available to us in the north are being used in the best value for money way. We also will want to align with what is now called the whole industry strategic plan. So this is the Great British Railways transition team developing their plan for 30 years. We've had lots of good dialogue with that team, and we want to make sure that as far as possible our plan aligns, at least in the short term, with their plan, so we have one agreed plan that we're working to across the north. So the paper sets out that approach, and we want to really integrate it into the strategic transport plan. We're not proposing to have a separate rail strategy document, but to have it fully integrated and embedded as part of the overall plan. That's one of the questions we're putting to committee members. Others, towards the end of the report, around whether you feel there should be more of a short-term focus or more of a longer-term focus over the 30 years. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, how we really ensure that passengers are put first and are central front and foremost to the plan. So there's a number of questions there, just seeking hopefully endorsement of the approach from members, but any specific feedback on those questions in the paper will be very welcome as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. I've got Andy first. Andy, over to you.
Thanks very much, David. If I could, I'll just take up that last question about short-term or long-term. I think it's very important that if it's to be meaningful, it does have to have a short-term focus, in my view, and it needs not just to deal with high level, but some of the specifics that this committee has tried to move forward. And I say that, David, because I'm worried about what I'm hearing with regard to investment on the railway in the north of England until the end of this decade. The emerging picture that I pick up around CP7, Chair, which will take us obviously to the end of the decade, is that there are no significant capacity enhancements planned for Central Manchester. So we're going to come on to talk about the Manchester Recovery Task Force later on the agenda. But that is very worrying indeed, in that, you know, we, as I keep saying, we accepted a reduced timetable on the basis that we would actually in the end get the expanded timetable. You know, there would be a clear timeline for the delivery of that. And as I understand, well, I think it's still a kind of an emerging picture, but that is what I'm picking up. And the sense is we will be lucky if services stand still by the end of this decade. In fact, they could go further backwards. So, Chair, what I'm looking for for this plan to be meaningful, it has to set out what we consider we need as a minimum to get a rail service that is, you know, we don't consider it's acceptable at the moment, do we? We've accepted a reduced timetable, and that was meant to be a time-limited position. It doesn't seem as though it is. It looks like it's becoming the new norm. And I think this plan would have to answer that question. You know, what is a basic level of service for our residents? And if the Manchester bottlenecks are left in place for the rest of this decade and with no plan into the 30s, well, you know, we are looking at congested infrastructure in the centre of Manchester for that period of time, unless they whittle out the timetable even more so that it doesn't become congested because they cut services even further. I'm really worried, Liam. I think this is a sort of sense of managed decline on the railways of the north of England that's emerging. There is a risk, I guess, that investment in the existing network potentially it's HS2 that's taking the resources away. I don't know, but that's how it begins to look. To have no capacity improvements planned, if that is what's coming through, I think that presents very real worries for the work of this committee, because I don't see how we will get back to the ambitions that were held in advance of May 18. You know, that was basically a good start. You know, that was meant to be getting us up to the level of other parts of the country. But now there is no prospect, it seems to me, of us going from the new timetable we've reluctantly accepted. So for me, David, I think the plan has to address that. It has to have timelines in. It has to have what's the minimum we would expect by what date, and that short-term focus, I think, is critical. Otherwise, you know, we are going to be meeting as a committee discussing congestion, cancellations, overcrowding for the next decade, and I don't particularly fancy that prospect. Thanks, Chair.
No, thanks, Andy. Completely agree with all of those points. Susan, and then I've got Craig. So, Susan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the paper outlines 9 points that the strategic transport plan should follow. I'd like to add a 10th in, which is the levelling up element of it. So I think some of the decisions made on the railways are very bad for disadvantaged places. Obviously, the IRP missed out Bradford from that, and that is very damaging to our economy, and shows that really in decision making about railways, they're not thinking about levelling up all the north or indeed all the country. And then again, recently Northern Rail have made changes, temporary hopefully, well, we'll see, to the timetable, which have cut off a lot of the disadvantaged areas from Bradford city centre. So I do think there needs to be more local understanding of these decisions when they're made, whether it's big infrastructure or timetable changes, to see what impact that has on an area. And you might not see that at northern or national level, but we do see it at local level, and it's very damaging for our places. So something about consulting with local actors about levelling up and the impacts that some of the changes can make, it needs to be in there. That voice needs to be heard. The local people voice needs to be heard, and it's not at the moment in those big decisions that are being made around rail. So a plea for a 10th on levelling up and connect it to local voices on that. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Susan. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I'm sure everyone would agree to add a 10th point in as you suggest. Craig?
Yeah, thanks very much, Liam. I think that whilst it should absolutely be a long-term plan, there needs to be within that some appropriate mix of short-term, medium-term and long-term deliverables, because if all the deliverables are long-term, there's a danger that those people who are currently in post for delivering them might not be in post by the time the delivery timescale comes about. So there's a danger that I think you lose accountability for those deliverables. And secondly, I think that it absolutely needs to put passengers first. There has in the past been reference to putting customers first, but because of the way the industry is structured, that can lead to some confusion as to who the customers actually are. I think this needs to be passenger focused. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Craig. And again, I think we'd all agree with all of those points accordingly. I'm not seeing any further kind of indications, so I'll kind of wrap up on this bit. But for me, this kind of item gets to the heart of what TFN is all about and should always be about, and that's frankly championing the north of England and the travelling public of the north of England. And you know, the points that Susan makes that it's absolutely crucial that it's all about levelling up and local people and the impact of railway investment factored in for what it means for local people is vital. But equally, as Andy says, you know, at the end of the day, it is completely unacceptable to have a diminution of services in the north and a diminution of investment in the North Railway that wouldn't allow for those kind of not just returner services but expanded services into the future. So this has to be in the right way, not just a visionary document but a very targeted document on the short, medium and long term, as Craig says, but particularly focusing on the actual tangibles of what we want to see, not just something that talks a good game, something that sets out a very detailed plan of what we want to achieve over the next decade and beyond. So if we're happy to endorse the paper and including all those comments that Andy, Susan and Craig have made, if that's agreed, then we can move on to the next item, which is number 5, which is the operational update. I think Gary's going to start this, but I think we've also got Matt from Network Rail, Matt from TPE and Tricia from Northern, who will also kind of be part of the presentation. So Gary, do you want to kick off first?
I shall do, Liam. Yeah, thank you. I'll take the paper as read, if I may. And really, I guess the highlight is, or the takeaway from the paper is that this has been a continuing extremely difficult period for railway operations, certainly for our two operators. Series of factors there, the end of the COVID wash of absences, and then, as you said, a continuing level of unusually high absence across much of the railway in the north, a series of either IR issues or pending IR concerns that mean that we needing to be speaking to the operators about what the timetable is likely to look like over the coming period, and the continuing absence of rest day working, which both of our operators have been relying to try and make their way through backlogs of training and so forth to have us ready both for this timetable and for the timetables to follow. I'll quite happily take any questions on the report itself, but I suspect actually that people will be keener to hear from the operators on what they're able to do about it. If I set out the problem, then the solutions in operational terms will rest with the operators and Network Rail rather than Rail North Partnership. So I may move across to introduce the operators without too much extra input from me. One thing I should say though, Liam, unusually off the back of the last Rail North Committee and our RNP report, I received a letter from Nick Whelan, General Secretary of ASLEF, concerned that one of the paragraphs, 3.8, which was discussing TPE's position, served to misrepresent the idea that it was that there was blame being apportioned to railway staff for the absence of services. I just want to clarify, it wasn't a point for the minutes, and so it didn't need a correction in the minutes, but I should just take this opportunity to clarify that wasn't at all the intention, and that I should unpack, I think, the fact that the absence of rest day working is just an exercise by the right of unions and staff to not have rest day working in place. It's not an industrial relations issue, or certainly not an industrial action issue of any sort, and I probably, in the interest of brevity, misrepresented that through the way that the paper was written. So I should apologise generally to anyone who was left thinking that was the objective, because it certainly wasn't. And I'll write to Mr. Whelan after the meeting today to point out that I've done that. So hopefully that's acceptable to folks. If there aren't any particular questions on the report itself, then I don't know if the operators have a preference for the order in which they'll speak. Tricia, normally Northern gets to go first because of the volumes concerned, but so if that suits here, then I'll probably hand over to you if that's okay, Liam, and stand by for any follow-on questions.
Okay, I'll go next then. So Trish Williams, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Northern. I'll just give an update on Northern and our operation, and I'll give some current context, including the timetable change in May, and then I'll just bring out some detail around recovery in general, industrial relations and training. So just in terms of the context, there is recovery, but the reality is that there is suppressed demand. The industry is clearly working within a financial restraint and constraint, and we're now starting to see some inflationary pressures on costs. And there is undoubtedly an increasing risk of industrial relations agenda impacting delivery. But for Northern, we've mobilised a number of transformation programmes, continue to protect that agenda amidst what is a challenging time. It lines up with what we set out in our business plan to ensure that we are building operational resilience and capability as well as capacity for the future, and that should benefit customers in the longer term in the local and indeed national economy. So we introduced the May timetable on Sunday, the 15th of May, alongside other operators, and the timetable is largely a continuation of previous service levels, focused on providing reliability and certainty for our customers and reducing short-term cancellations. And I do appreciate the frustration of some of our customers and passengers, just to clarify that point, where they're not seeing services they did have previously. But we have, though, introduced some services that provide capacity for our leisure travellers to our coastal locations. Before I go into detail about recovery, IR and training, I just wanted to mention a couple of highlights, if I may, successes to note. So one is that we've been granted Investors in People Gold accreditation. That didn't quite make it into the paper because we only got notified post publishing the papers. And we've got a Silver Whistle Award, which is an industry award for improved passenger operating performance. And we were shortlisted in a Women in Rail award for our EDI strategy. So I'll move on to recovery. Demand is at 88% of pre-COVID levels. We are starting to see commuter demand pick up. It's still very suppressed at about 41% of demand recovery. And if I put it in context, Northern's combined business and commuter recovery is about 3% above the sector in general. And as has been mentioned in this committee before, leisure is really it continues to be our strongest market and is leading the way in terms of recovery. And weekends are recovering the strongest, with some record Sundays observed over the last 8 weeks. And just a note on channel share, the switch to digital continues, so that now accounts for about 58% of all journeys, and 1 in 4 tickets are now sold through a ticket office. So as I mentioned, we are seeing an increased risk of industrial relations issues impacting operational delivery. And I'll just talk about RMT and ASLEF in turn. So RMT, I think it's well recognised now through the press that the RMT union balloted their members on a number of issues, jobs, pay and terms and conditions as the reason for their ballot. And members have voted in favour of industrial action. Any action will be subject to 2 weeks' notice, and just for context for Northern, that's about 3,000 of their members in our company across about 130 roles. There is no industrial action announced as yet, but we know the only way to resolve this dispute is through dialogue, and we will encourage RMT to join the other trade unions in discussions as soon as possible on all the matters cited. In the meantime, we continue to and have worked on contingency plans for multiple scenarios, and further detail will of course come following any announcement on the actual action that is to be taken. We'll take some time to work through that. There's a lot of detail, and we'll continue to feed into the North of England contingency group meetings and share that detail as soon as it is available. And if I move to ASLEF, the drivers union, so since the beginning of the calendar year, we have been operating without a rest day working agreement for drivers, which reduces our flexibility for training. The discussions continue on that with ASLEF, although there is no agreement at the moment. And then since the introduction of the May timetable, we have had a fail to agree with ASLEF in the Northwest. The disagreement is centred around the number of variable spare terms of duty that came into effect in the May timetable change. It is impacting customers with some cancellations, and we've been supplementing that with replacement transport. We will continue to advise customers to check immediately before they travel to ensure their journeys go as smoothly as possible, and our regional teams will be keeping stakeholders updated. And again, we are pursuing all avenues to seek a resolution and deliver a reliable service, and the last meeting was actually held yesterday. That brings me to training. Not having a rest day working agreement does impact our ability to train as much as we would like. In terms of a training backlog, we have 2 parts to our training. We have a training academy, and we have then route and traction knowledge training, which is held locally in the training crew depots. So in terms of the training of new drivers through the academy, that's all on track with no backlog. We've got 25 drivers in the academy, and we've put 39 trainees into the regions this year so far. That means we've currently got about 230 apprentice drivers and 181 conductor apprentices in the business. The driver training for route and traction, which is carried out locally, though, remains significant. You'll be aware, this committee will be aware that in the midst of COVID, when we had difficulties conducting training at the beat rate we would like due to having to have bubbles, etc., lots of different factors, we built up about 12,000 driver training days worth of backlog. As of this April, that was reduced down to 9,000. And one of the things that we've been doing, and I talked to the Rail North Partnership Board about this last week, is how we prioritise our training. And we use a tool called a link efficiency tool, which really means that we can focus the training where it absolutely needs to be. The starting point in September 20 was with a target of 80%. A lot of our major depots, so Leeds, Piccadilly, Victoria, Wigan and Liverpool, were well below that target, around about 60% of that target for a link efficiency. Now, apart from 2, they are well above that target, which I'm pleased to see. So Leeds has been particularly successful, where they've moved from having 66% of all drivers competent in route and traction knowledge in September 20 to 87% at May this year. We've done some work with Manchester Business School to just provide some systems analysis of our diagrams and link sizes at the depots, very technical, but they help us to understand how do we achieve the best resilience of service both now and in the future. And we intend to do more work with the Manchester Business School, but that has already guided our thinking and it has enabled us to use every training day as wisely as we possibly can. So in summary, good progress has been made, but we still need to continue that focus on improving the competence levels across the major depots. If we haven't got that competence level, it does reduce our flexibility to cover the train plan. Just wanted to mention MRTF, so the Manchester Recovery Task Force does remain a priority for us to deliver that successfully. And we are also focused on securing resolution on our IR issues. And I will stop there and hand back to either the chair or Gary.
Thanks, Tricia. I know Richard's indicating, but what I'm going to do is just take each of the industry partners before we bring sort of questions in, just to try and keep things sort of efficient. So I don't know, Matt Galton, do you want to go next from TP, and then Matt Rice obviously can sum up from a Network Rail perspective. So Matt, if that's okay, over to you.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief to make sure there's time for questions. I'm sure members will want to ask the industry. So our position from a recovery position is that we're about 75% of pre-COVID journeys, about 80% of pre-COVID revenue. There is unquestionably a suppressed demand. It's really, really important that the railway gets itself in a position that we can realise the undoubted desire for leisure demand that we are seeing, as well as the recovery of the business and commuter market. And it's really, really important that we get ourselves in that place. And we know, for example, on Sundays for the last 4 months, we've seen impacts at TPE. We've been moving about 20,000 customers on Sunday, but there is unquestionably a bigger potential, and we know for the good of our customers and the communities that we serve that we need to get there. And that really brings me to where we've been in recent period of time at TP in terms of our performance. I'd just like to acknowledge that impact that it's having on our customers and our communities, and indeed our colleagues. I want to make it very clear that the levels that we've seen aren't acceptable to me. They're not acceptable to my team. We feel it keenly. We are sorry when we let customers and indeed you and your communities down. That's not where we want to be. I would just remind us that in the period up until the autumn, we actually saw 6 months of the best performance that TP had ever delivered in its history. And that's the place that we want to get back to as soon as we can. So from the December period onwards, we've really had 4 key challenges that we've been dealing with. Higher than average sickness amongst our train crews, untypically high, sometimes over 20% at individual depots. A loss of driver rest day work, as Gary said, that was ASLEF's prerogative, but we did lose that before December. We've had the RMT dispute, formal dispute relating to our conductors, which, although that's principally had an effect on Sundays and the odd Saturday, has actually also resulted in loss of rest day working and overtime during the week. And we do have a very intense programme of training. There is a pandemic backlog. We've got through a fair chunk of the pandemic backlog, but there is still more to do. And we are particularly working hard to get ready for the forthcoming very important timetable changes relating to the MRTF change in December, and also getting us ready for the Transpennine route upgrade. It's fair to say that those 4 things do exacerbate the kind of typical issues that we get on the day, like infrastructure failure or sadly fatalities and so on. So, if I just give you an example from yesterday. Yesterday we started the day at Cleethorpes with some vacancies caused by that loss of rostering flexibility. We saw sickness on the day that we could not respond to, and then further later on in the day, vandalism, track vandalism, and a points failure. And all of those things combine make for a difficult and challenging situation from a service delivery point of view. And we want to get ourselves in a better place as soon as we can. In terms of talking with trade union colleagues, we have had recent discussions to see if we can resolve these issues amicably and critically affordably. I expect that we will be having further dialogue shortly. Trish referred to the national ballot situation with RMT colleagues. RMT members at TP have also voted for that. We expect to hear shortly from the RMT exec where their heads are in terms of dates for strike. I would just like to echo what Trish said. I think, the industry's got some important challenges ahead of it in terms of getting itself in a fit state to recover from the pandemic and the different challenges that it sees. My hope, my desire very much is that we can do that amicably with colleagues and work that through. There are some important topics there, but action that continues to interrupt our delivery of services is not something that's conducive to our recovery, and we will work hard to make sure that we can avoid that wherever we can. Thank you, Chair. I'll pass back to you.
Thanks, Matt. And if I can ask Matt Rice from Network Rail just to finish the triumvirate from the industry, and then we'll move on to questions and comments.
Okay, Chair, I'm going to go for super brevity, but of course happy to indulge questions now or offline. So we'll just do. There are some good news stories amongst this. The North of England's some of the underlying asset health is benefiting from a whole load of stuff, probably because of COVID not being used as much as it had in the past. So we have the existing asset is well fit to continue to deliver as we need to in the future, and we shouldn't take that for granted. Matt and Trish have both touched on a call for help, but also a statement of facts. The single biggest impact on the performance of the railway outside of some of the industrial relations issues we've had has been the external impact of people either trespassing and making a nuisance of themselves or stealing cable. The spectre of copper theft is back in a way that it was almost a decade ago. The BTP are doing everything they can, but they are, like many public bodies, not necessarily as resourced as we'd like, but they are doing what they can. So it's just really a plea to all colleagues on the call to work in your local communities to raise awareness of the any incursion or any inappropriate activity in neighbourhoods in and around the railway, because cable theft particularly is so terminal to a day's service. It really can impact the whole country in places, if you get it in places like Sheffield, which has been particularly badly hit. The good news is it's got national interest. So I did some work with the Sunday Times this weekend just to try and raise the interest of all parties so we can try and stop it. But we really could do with any help that's available to get on top of that. And then whilst growth feels a long time away, to speak to David's point, we are continuing to make progress with TRU, as Matthew alluded to. Work at Leeds continues, developments are continuing in the Teesside area, and there is still a good chance that we'll start to see some development on the East Coast, which will serve certainly Leeds and Newcastle, etc., in different ways within the next year. So if we can win the day on what I'm about to talk to now in terms of industrial action, I think there is a short-term future, as has been talked about on this call earlier, but the next few months are going to be pretty hard. So what that really means in terms of Network Rail, we are also in the midst of the RMT National Strike. In simple terms, that means our signalling teams and our maintenance teams have been balloted, and 14,500 out of about 15,500 said that they were in support of strike or action short of a strike. Again, in the simplest of terms, I'm happy to detail offline if needed to be. If our signalling community walk out for a day of action or a sustained period of action short of a strike, so working to rule, etc., our ability to operate the network which TPE, Northern, LNER, etc., and all other operators depend on will be significantly diminished by an order of magnitude that we've not seen for at least a decade, if longer. So I don't mean to be too dramatic about it, but I think it's important we're open about the size of the challenge we face and give some assurance we are committed to try and reach a conclusion with the union, which means strike or action short of strike is avoided. But it is a reality we're facing for the first time in most people's lived experience. So I hope you accept the openness with which is intended, but also recognise the commitment from Trish and myself and Matt to working alongside you to try and get through this so that we can get into a slightly more bright conversation. Chair, I've gone through, there's lots of not talked about there, but I'm mindful of your time, so I'm happy to move to questions.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to the other Matt and Tricia as well. I've already got 3 people indicating. If there are others that want to indicate as well, that would be helpful so we can try and take everyone in sequential order. So Richard has waited very patiently, so I'll bring Richard in, then Jamie, then Susan, then Craig, then Andy accordingly. So Richard, over to you.
Yeah, many thanks, Liam. Apologies for being parochial at this stage, but that's something I've got to do. Tricia, I'm Richard Hannigan. I'm the Deputy Leader of North Lincolnshire Council. And just a matter I just need to bring to your attention is about the complete lack of service from Northern Trains in North Lincolnshire. I think we must be unique in the UK in that we have no trains running whatsoever, and unique in our area that Northern Trains really don't have a presence here. We've got a bus service running from Scunthorpe to Doncaster, which is an important route for our residents. And what we've heard so far is that that's likely to continue until 2023. I understand you've got lots of issues at the moment and lots of challenges, but zero service really isn't acceptable for us. And what I would like is some assurance that you'll make some serious efforts to get us a train back on, so that we can start to assess the demand, so that you can start to get some realistic projections as to what the service might be in the future. It is important to us, and at the moment what's present just isn't good enough.
Thanks, Richard. Tricia, can you deal specifically with Richard's point there, please?
Yeah, Richard, I have a lot of sympathy with you there, and I am aware of the situation, and what I can commit to is as we look to build our timetable, then clearly we will look at the demand that is in that area and understand, and I think it links to Councillor Hinchcliffe's point before, there's a number of factors that we should be considering when we're looking at services, including the sort of social impact that services have. So really sorry that there isn't anything we can do right now, but totally commit to looking at that service and understanding in a post-COVID world what that demand looks like for future timetable changes.
Well, thanks, Tricia. But I mean, all I will say is about demand. Don't look at the present demand at the moment, because that's demand for a bus, which is clearly not what people are signing up to. So I think we're going to have to get a service in place sooner rather than later to start to assess that demand, even if it's at a reduced level. So thank you for that. I mean, just one last point on the bigger picture, the issue with industrial relations at the moment. I know it's tough. Completely acknowledge the right of unions to represent the best interests of their members. But there's also the issue of the passengers. The passengers simply have to come first. And all that I would urge is when discussions occur, for goodness sake, let's get some common ground, let's get some shared ambition and agree some shared outcomes and come to an agreement before industrial action is necessary. It's just essential for all of us. Thanks, Chair. Much appreciated.
No, thanks, Richard, and thanks for those comments accordingly. And completely agree that it's unacceptable to have a bus service running when there's steel rails that should be providing a train service for you. That really is something that needs to be addressed, not just in your patch, but any part of the north where that occurs. Right, I've still got 6 more people. If there's anyone else, please indicate, because in the interests of efficiency, want to try and get everyone in, but don't want to prolong the debate longer than we have to, because we've got quite a packed agenda. But I've got Jamie next. So Jamie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Tricia, Matt and Matthew, I really do appreciate how difficult your jobs are, and those of the train operating companies. You wouldn't be doing your jobs if you weren't really strong advocates of public transport. However, like the other mayors and council leaders on this call, our job primarily is to develop the economic prosperity of the areas we represent. and that's damn near impossible without a functioning transport system, which is pretty much where we are at the moment. Anecdotally, twice in the last couple of weeks, I've had to use intercity rail, and each time the train's either been delayed by more than 30 minutes by signalling failures or cancelled due to some kind of staff-related issue, driver shortages primarily. If we are to build up the demand as everybody wants to happen, it's just not going to happen with that service. You know that. But this comes back to the issue of we need adequate investment in the rail system. If we've reached a point where a ballot on an overwhelming number, I mean, Matt was talking about 14,500 to 15,500 people saying that, yes, we've reached a point where we're willing to stop working and stop getting paid because this has reached an acceptable point. This is something that's been building a long, long time. And not necessarily because any one company has done this. I think 15 train operating companies have affected by the ballot action as well as Network Rail. Since this is a public forum, I would strongly urge the government to fix this, because we cannot have a modern, levelled up northern economy without adequate investment in the rail system. And whenever you start squeezing these things, something breaks somewhere. And at the moment, it's the industrial relations that have broken down. And I hope we get this fixed before we start to see cuts and a return to the bad old days of Hatfield and Potter's Bar and these sorts of things happening. So if we can make sure that this is recorded in the minutes and that the government are aware that this is the feeling of certainly everyone I represent. And we've had, one of my team was telling me that just this weekend, because of successive cancellations, they had to drive out and pick up a group of stranded 13-year-olds. This is to the point of not just inconvenience, it's to the point of a broken system now. It needs fixing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie, and absolutely we'll make sure all that's recorded in how we respond, because you're completely right in all the points that you make there. Susan, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. So one for TPE, one for Northern, really. First of all, TPE, I'm sure it'll be said by other people on this meeting as well, but the short-term cancellations and reliability of services are unacceptable. Looking at residents in Slough and Marsden in particular, who, you know, they cannot rely on getting home after work. One guy's actually taking his overnight bag into work because he doesn't know whether he'll be able to get back, and that's just not sustainable at all. So what's happening about that, and what are we doing to resolve that issue and giving people a straightforward and honest service? Secondly, on Northern, obviously Northern timetable has been cut back temporarily, I'm told, for 6 months. I want assurances that the full timetable is going to be put back by December 23 without any changes, cancellations from existing services. And also, I want to make sure that we do not use COVID as an excuse for cutting services. We have to give people a chance to get back to work and get back to their normal routes of travel. I do worry that government think everybody's going to work from home now because they're all working from home. That is not the case for vast swathes of the north of England. They have to go into work, and therefore we need to give those services time to build up their patronage, to make sure that they are still there and that economies can thrive. Transport is a major plank of our recovery, economic recovery for the north. If it's damaged, and if it's damaged forever, we can never get back to where we are, never mind actually regeneration plans for accelerating our economic prosperity, which we need in places like West Yorkshire. So I want to guarantee that those cutbacks in Northern are temporary and are going to be put back permanently in December 23 at the latest. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Who wants to take that first, Matt or Tricia?
Happy to refer to the first point. So, Councillor Hitchcliffe, I absolutely get the importance of what we do for places like Slough and Marsden. And as I said at the top, you know, in terms of the service levels that we're giving places like that, it's unacceptable, and we feel it very keenly. The services on that corridor are particularly dependent on crews from Manchester and Hull. We have seen some very, very high levels of sickness, unusual high levels of sickness there. But it's fundamentally, you know, the loss of flexibility that we've seen recently through the dispute with the RMT colleagues, and which obviously is affecting the Sunday services, particularly on that corridor, and to a lesser extent during the week, and also the absence of rest day working by our drivers that are key to be able to get a step change in the service that we offer there. I can assure you that we are going to see if we can continue to get a breakthrough on those, because the gentleman you referred to is not real lives, real people, and we absolutely get that we want to get people to the places that they need to be in a reliable way. So I hear you.
Tricia, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I'll just come back in on the point around the services being temporarily cut. That is the situation, and we are committed to reinstating services. All I would say is there may well be a need just to look at, do those services go absolutely back to what they were pre-COVID, or and I take your point about always talk about COVID, or is there a different way of using our traction and our drivers? But the commitment there is to increase services.
Okay, thanks, Tricia. Craig, over to you. You're next.
Thank you, Liam. Just 2 quick points I want to flag, really, rather than questions that I want to ask. The first relating to Northern. I'm getting emails from disabled passengers who are being left on the platform at Poynton Station. And this is a capacity issue due to the locally stopping Macclesfield to Manchester Piccadilly service being too full by the time it arrives at Poynton for people to get on if they're in a wheelchair or any kind of mobility scooter. And I just think what an appalling message that sends about putting passengers first. And then related to the thing, Avanti West Coast have recently suspended the 802 service from, again, Macclesfield to Manchester Piccadilly. That's an express service. And the rationale we're being given for this is that it's a lesser use service. Now, that may well be the case when it leaves London Euston at 16 minutes past 6 in the morning. But by the time it gets to Macclesfield, it's a peak time commuter service. And it's not difficult to see, I think, that the second issue I've raised is contributing to the first. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig. I'll bring Tricia in to answer the point about Poynton and how they're dealing with capacity in the round, particularly for disabled people. But perhaps Gary shortly also can pick up the Avanti point. So Tricia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks for raising that to me. I'm not aware of that, so I will take away that and look at it. It sounds totally unacceptable to leave people at Poynton. So that isn't one that's been flagged to me before. So thanks for raising that to my attention. I'll take that away.
Gary, do you want to quickly come back on the Avanti point? And I'm just thinking perhaps at a future meeting, we probably want to bring Avanti to this forum, because there's certainly a lot of Liverpool-specific issues I could raise around Avanti as well. And I know there's other colleagues in the north who might want to do that. But do you want to answer that specific point wherever you can? But obviously, bear in mind, we probably need to take that to Avanti directly.
You're quite right, Liam. So, yeah, we were made aware of that change quite belatedly, and ourselves in Northern and TfN did look at whether there were anything that we could do to try and substitute for the loss of that service. Councillor Byrne, I totally take the point that it's a very important one at this end, even if it's a quieter one for most of its routes. There wasn't anything immediate that Northern could do. I must admit that I then was off for a week and a bit to move house, and haven't caught up quite yet with whether there are any other sort of items of feedback from Avanti themselves. So I will take that away to follow up with my colleague in the department who manages that contract and check whether there's something more that we can do in the short run. But it's certainly the point has been appreciated, and at this end, as I say, we have looked at whether there's anything that we can do to support with our own resource, although that looked very, very difficult. Tricia and I can likewise catch up with you maybe afterwards and explain that there's stuff that's done at the weekend that isn't readily replicated inside the week, and so there were things that looked like options that proved unviable, but we'll come back on that. That's okay.
Thanks, Gary. I've got Matt from CPE indicates. Is it pertinent to those questions Craig just raised?
It is. I mean, obviously, Councillor Brown, Avanti are a sister company of ours. I'll personally raise the point that you made with my MD colleague after this meeting, if that helps, just to further amplify the issue for him. So I'll do that today for you.
Thanks, Matt. That's very helpful. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I find it very frustrating that we're having this conversation again about basically poor standards across the railway in the north of England. I feel for Richard with no service at all, but on our side of the Pennines, things have slipped backwards. Cancellations, overcrowding, particularly at weekends. People can't rely on the railway, and this is damaging because we're meant to be recovering as a city region. Now we're growing in population. We've got business investment coming in, but the railway is not supporting us. And I can appreciate, Chair, that there's lots of reasons why things are difficult, but these issues have been going on a long time. Rest day working. You know, this committee was discussing that in the summer of 2018, and it's not been resolved. So where is the taking of responsibility to resolve issues that are holding back the railway in the north of England? Then, you know, we see the disruption at weekends. Yesterday, on the services serving Bolton, Wigan, Rochdale, 18.5% very late or cancelled. I mean, that just can't be good enough. And there can be a range of reasons given, but I don't see how the industry can defend those figures. And so the question for me is, rather than pointing to all the excuses, when can we expect a reliable train service again in the north of England? I appreciate what you said, Matt, about your best ever performance late last year, but we need a railway that has a steady state, not one where it has patches of good performance and then collapses again. And I think some of the issues are out of your control, but I don't believe all of the issues are out of your control. And I just feel we need more than the industry is offering to us. We're also aware that the infrastructure is not being delivered to support the timetable ambitions that we've had. So it can't be good enough, this. It genuinely can't be good enough. The people at weekends are just seeing their plans. Honestly, it's like a gamble trying to turn up for a train. So I just need to hear today, what are you all doing to give us a reliable railway? Because obviously we're not even at a point yet where the timetable is full. It's still got, you know, a COVID impact. So if it's like this now, how can we have any realistic hope that it gets much better? And these are long-standing issues. These are not new issues. Training, industrial relations issues linked to rest days. These were the things that we were being given as excuses in 2018, and we're still being given them as excuses in 2022. When are these things going to be resolved, and when will we have a steady state railway that people can rely on?
Thanks, Andy. Tricia, Matt, who'd like to respond to Andy?
I'll respond. Ladies first.
Tricia, you go first.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to put a timescale on it because it's not where we want to be either. So we are working really, really hard to make sure that we have that focus on training. That is absolutely key for us. That gives us the flexibility to be able to deploy resources as we want them and to be able to restore the services to where we want them to be. So that is an absolute focus. Unfortunately, the challenge of IR isn't always within our gift, but we are talking to ASLEF, we are talking to RMT, and we will do everything in our power to make sure that we can get to local resolutions. And then we are seeing absence improving. So for us, that is a positive move in the right direction. So the key things for us really are to make sure that we can get on top of that training. The reduced timetable helps us with that. But obviously, as I mentioned before, we have got some very recent issues that have, the reason why we want them to be resolved as well is that they put extra pressure on other parts of our business. So this is something that is an absolute focus for us, and it's not where we want to be either.
Matt from CPE.
So I think from the discussions that Andy's had with me in the past, he knows that I'm passionate about an expanding railway. That's where we need to be. I think I would say, Andy, that in context of the performance that we had, 6 months of really good performance last summer, we had a number of factors come to play which aren't here now. We had a stable industrial relations climate. We had Network Rail colleagues absolutely on top of the infrastructure. We had really great support from our suppliers, and we had a training program that we were able to prosecute, and we were seeing falling levels of sickness. Now in some of those areas we are seeing falling sickness. The training program we're seeking to carry on, but you're right, we need to recreate collectively all of that stability to get back onto a platform where we can build and expand this railway. As I said, we feel very keenly about the issues. We're working every issue that we can. Every card that I've got that I can work to change this, I can assure you my team and I are doing that. It does need others to help us get to that position of stability again, because we know that for the good of the region to serve, that's where we've got to get ourselves back to.
Thanks. Matt Rice from
Chair,
Network Rail.
would you mind if I just
Yes,
come
of course
back
you
in?
can, Andy. Yeah, absolutely.
Just because I think there's obviously mention made there of infrastructure, Matt. To what extent are the problems infrastructure related?
It varies depending on what sections of the railway you're looking at, Andy. I think, and I'm never sure how helpful I find talking about where we're doing well and where others aren't. But again, as Matt said, I think we are benefiting from a sort of quiet year in COVID, and the last 18 months underlying asset conditions, so track, signalling in terms of absolute failure rates, are all looking positive in the main. That there are pockets where we've got to do a bit better, where against historical norms, not where we need to be. But I think again, it's just one part of the jigsaw, because as Matt Galton rightly said, that issue yesterday clearly sums up how the system needs to work together. So I think I don't need to sit here and say you need to be lobbying we don't need to be lobbying anyone for any more than we've already got in terms of the money to maintain the railway in its current state. Our big issues are we all, and Network Rail included, need to sort out our IR climate. We all need to continue to lobby for sensible, targeted investment in growth, because when the good performance is here, we still lose some of that 100% performance because there are areas of the network that's congested. That would be that would be my takeaway on this. In terms of specifics, I'm sure with Tricia and myself, happy to come and spend a bit more time as needed on some of the detail of with your officers or colleagues on where some of the asset performance isn't quite where it needs to be, but underlying asset performance is the macro issue at the moment.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. I think that's very helpful, and that's a very helpful offer. If you can feed into our officer team, we can perhaps develop a brief on the overall kind of infrastructure resilience. We're obviously going to be talking about infrastructure investment, particularly pertaining to central Manchester, shortly in the agenda as well. I've got last two kind of contributions, Charles and then Oliver. So Charles, do you want to go next?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. For a lot of people, getting the train is the only option in places like Lancashire to get to work or to get to school. I represent some of the most disadvantaged parts of our country, and it is the disadvantage of the ones that are most likely to suffer when the train doesn't turn up. They don't have a car, they don't have an alternative option. And so while I endorse the comments of some of the colleagues on here talking about how their desire to improve the railways, I don't see anyone condemning the actions of the trade unions. I do not think that strike action is in the best interests of the most disadvantaged people in our society who need the train. The only railway staff who are going to lose out are going to be those who are in training, and their training will just get delayed because of this industrial action, and therefore it'll be longer before they're on full pay and they're fully trained and they're able to be deployed into the network and into the service. They're the only ones that are going to lose out, and then the issues of the lack of workforce and the fact we've not trained enough people is just getting perpetuated. So I think as a committee, I think we should have a more robust position on the industrial action itself. I think that we need to get back around the negotiating table. I mean, there was something in the press this weekend that said that there was a ballot for, I can't remember which one, there was a ballot for industrial action before the negotiations had completed. I really think that we should be on the side of passengers and people, and I would like us to have a position on encouraging a way forward that doesn't involve industrial action.
Thanks, Charles. In the interest of trying to find consensus, I think it's best that we focus on the perspective of getting everyone around a table rather than trying to kind of castigate individual parties within all of that. You've obviously clearly got your views. I've respectfully got a different view, and I know others will have a different perspective as well. And when I come to sum up, I'll kind of make the points about how I think we need everyone to get around the table urgently to resolve all of these issues rather than trying to kind of pick fault with different sides in all of this. I think we've got to find a solution rather than kind of adding fuel to the fire, if you like. I've got Oliver next, so I'll bring Oliver in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I guess, throw my support behind the comments previously from Jamie, from Susan and from Andy, particularly those comments related to the notion that transport is a foundational part of our prosperity. And here in South Yorkshire in particular, there have been and are particular issues around the northern services and those reduction of services to particularly to Leeds and to Nottingham. And I just was slightly concerned by Trish's comments, which seem to sort of row back from that commitment to restore services. So Trish, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a bit more confidence, please, about the restoration of those services come, I think, December, that would be fantastic. There's also the issues in South Yorkshire with cross country and those services being, the diminution of those services as well. So just appreciate any thoughts about that as well. I guess I just also probably is worth saying, I'm a new mayor. I've been meeting with partners from the transport sector, particularly providers, but also passengers. And I think the thing that has struck me in the last month is I would assume unique approach of transport providers who seem to be committed to cutting their way to better services. And I'm slightly it seems to be a theme throughout, really. There's a kind of attempt to cut back on services in order to improve improve reliability. And it just seems to me that if we want to get people back on the network and improve services, we actually need to be investing, as Jamie has so clearly said. So, I just appreciate any thoughts on those points, please.
Yeah, completely agree with all the points you make there, Oliver. Tricia, do you want to answer the specific points that Oliver just asked there?
Yeah, so just in terms of specifically reinstating, then I can commit that we will reinstate. What I don't want to do is say we'll go back to pre-COVID timetables, because the demand is slightly different. So we had a timetable in December 21. We have pulled back from that in the East area. I can commit to going back to that. Can I commit to going all the way back to pre-COVID levels? I don't think that's the right thing to do, because we're not leaving ourselves with any capacity then to look at where we might be seeing a need for services in some of the areas that you've talked about. So I think that is we need to be able to therefore say, yes, we can go back to where we were in December, but in terms of going higher than that, we do need to understand where those services are going to fall. In terms of cutting to become more resilient, we haven't done that. On the west side, we've broadly kept the services as they were, and unfortunately now we're seeing cancellations due to that inflexibility of our resource. That's down to training, as I've mentioned, but equally it is down to some local action. The training is absolutely on us, and therefore the only way to get on top of that training without a rest day working agreement is to cut services. It's not what we want to do. We're still talking to ASLEF about that rest day working agreement, and then that will give us more flexibility to be able to train on route and traction. So probably not what you want to hear, because there's no quick answer. It's almost a repeat of what I've said before, but that's our focus.
Okay, thanks, Tricia. I'll bring Keith in because he's just indicated as the last comment, then I'll sum up accordingly. Keith?
Yeah, thanks, Liam, and thanks to everybody. 15 years, Liam, I've been sitting representing Cumbria on Transport for the North and working with colleagues like Edward, our previous colleagues in the past across the north of England. I'm not sure, if I'm totally honest, whether we're any further forward now than we were 15 years ago. I'm really not. Coming back to the point, Liam, that you made very early on, this is a government issue. All the news at the moment is around transport. It's around airlines, the thousands of people who are stuck at airports. We've got people left on train stations, trains not running. I have real sympathy with the owners of these, the staff that's trying to manage these services. But I think, as everybody said, it is absolutely not good enough in this day and age when we're trying to get the economy back working. We're trying to get people back enjoying life again. We've just had the opening of the Elizabeth line. It's so many years late. It's multi millions of pounds overspent. That's probably somebody wants to know what colour television I've got. It's just not good enough. And I think we demand the Secretary of State comes and talks to us. He's never visited Transport for the North yet. We have had other people used to come, ministers, and speak to us and be supportive. I don't think this, and I will be political, I don't think this government have any idea of the situation this country's in at this moment. It is an absolute disgrace. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith, and yeah, very much kind of agree with much of the sentiment that you just set out there. Look, in summing up, I share everyone's frustration in terms of how things are across the rail network across the north of England. And I say that sat in a city region where, on the Merseyrail network, for example, we're getting back to pre-COVID timetables. I can go from Liverpool city centre to Southport virtually every 15 minutes. Yet to go to St Helens in the east of our city region, it's virtually an hourly service. So I get very frustrated where there's part of the rail network in our patch where we are getting back to where we need to be, yet there's all these kind of issues across the wider north of England where we're nowhere near where we should be. I'm not going to repeat everything that everyone has just said, but I do think it's vital that we focus on how we build back from COVID. Yes, we might want to use the resources slightly different in the future if demand and travel patterns have changed, but we certainly want to have at least the same level of resource going in as we had pre-COVID, but actually building back and getting more into the future, because that's what's required to actually level up the north of England, as the government has frequently promised to us. Obviously, a lot of what's been said is pertaining to industrial relations. It's not for us to wade into that directly. I don't think any parties would thank us for that. However, it is absolutely right that we do comment and make our kind of voice kind of clearly heard. There's a number of different aspects to it, but certainly kind of it's imperative on government, the Department for Transport, to step up to the table to avoid a national strike. That wouldn't be in anyone's interest, and I know that's a call that we will be making loud and clear for DFT to get round the table with the RMT to find the right resolution to that. But there are also kind of more local issues that need addressing. Quite frankly, DFT needs to give TP and Northern more local flexibility to sort out some of the existing disputes that they've got within their own train operators. But equally, where there are some elements around things like rest day working, quite frankly, that involves deeper dialogue to get that sorted. And I think the most important thing with all of these elements that pertain to industrial relations is the urgency to get it sorted. We can't afford to wait weeks on end for the North Railway to be as patchy as it continues to be over the past few months. Keith made the point about the Secretary of State attending the Transport for the North meeting. I think that's a very pertinent point. But I think all those points that we've just gone through there about DfT's role in trying to address some of these industrial relations issues. I know our chair, Patrick McLaughlin, will be having a meeting with the Rail Minister, so I think one of the things we will be doing as a committee is instructing Patrick to take all of those messages to the Rail Minister to actually make sure we can get this resolved as quickly as possible, because at this moment in time, for the travelling public of the north of England, it's completely unacceptable. Martin, I can see you're indicating, so do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to build on that last point, as you've quite rightly pointed out, following on from these issues being raised at the previous Rail North Committee and indeed then discussed at the Transport for the North Board. Patrick wrote as the Chair of Transport for the North, and that meeting is with the Rail Minister shortly. I think you're right. There's a very strong and clear message that we can feed into that conversation with the Minister. I think what you've also given us, Chair, is a very clear message that colleagues will take back into the conversations we're having through the Rail North Partnership. And I think also, given the circumstances, we as officers continue to have regular dialogue with DfT officials. And again, I think what you've given us today is a very clear message that we can take and feed into those conversations with the Minister, with the DfT officials. It's clear to me, Chair, that we will need to make space for this item, for this issue to be discussed at the TfN board on the 30th of June. It is clearly too important not to be on the main board, and by that time we will have had the conversation with the Rail Minister. So I think I just kind of wanted to kind of set out where I could see the routes that we can build upon your summing up, Chair.
No, that's excellent. Appreciate that, Martin, greatly. That report is for noting, so if we can note accordingly, and I appreciate we've gone on longer than we were planned to for that, but it is necessary that we raised it in that way and gave everyone the opportunity to kind of raise all of their concerns in public session. If we want to move on to item number 6 then, which is the East Coast Mainline Service and Infrastructure Report for noting, I think Chris is going to take us through this briefly.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. I'll just give you a quick overview of the contents of the report. Basically, it covers 3 main topics. First of all, it gives the committee an update on development of the East Coast Mainline timetable, particularly for the pursuit of improvements to north-east-north-west connectivity that was to restore that, in fact, that was lost during the May 22 timetable change, including ensuring that local station calls and services to all the cities are maintained and ultimately enhanced. It also is outlined the provisions in the integrated rail plan and the work led by Transport North East to identify what's needed to achieve 7 or 8 trains per hour north of York. The report also then presents the work led by TfN to develop a blueprint for further development of the East Coast Mainline North on the model successfully developed for Manchester, linking infrastructure with service development. And that was with the input of the stakeholder authorities based on the current best information that we have in terms of infrastructure enhancements in delivery and in the pipeline to be delivered as well. I will stress it's a first draft, so it's not the final product. It's very much a live document and it's a starting point really. But a key point here is that DfT support this approach as well, which is really positive, but it needs adoption by the industry to take it forward, which is vital. In that respect, the report refers to Transport North East writing to the department regarding setting up a board or governance involving stakeholders. Since the report was published, we've actually had a holding response, or TNE have had a holding response from the Secretary of State saying that they are currently developing governance proposals to cover all aspects of the IRP. So we've just had a holding response on that. It does specifically reference ensuring the input of stakeholders across the North and Midlands is captured and continued regular engagement through the Northern Transport Acceleration Council. Finally, we've got a short report and short update in the report on the establishment of a Leeds Area Studies Board by the combined authority with industry and local authority partners to steer and provide oversight for various studies covering the extension, particularly of high-speed services to Leeds, development of Leeds station capacity as a major hub for the whole of the North, and particularly including better connections to Bradford. I understand we're still waiting for terms of reference for this board from the DfT, which will obviously need to be reviewed when they are received to ensure that the right level of strategic input is facilitated, but again, particularly recognising the importance of the Leeds area in the rail network for the North. And I'll just finish by adding that it's proposed to have an officer briefing and then a private briefing session for committee members with DfT and the Network Rail as well on East Coast Mainline North development sometime the week commencing 13th of June, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's really helpful. And I think that final point was the most important one, actually, about having, because obviously we're still waiting for government proposals around this issue. But as soon as we get those proposals, not just that the officer briefing happens, but a political briefing happens with the ability for that to be a consultation call. So Martin can take forward any actions that we ask him to do very quickly, because particularly for communities in Yorkshire and the North East that are directly affected by the East Coast Main Line, this is pretty pivotal stuff. So it's absolutely vital that as TFN we move quickly when we need to. I've got Jamie and Heather indicating, so I'll bring Jamie in first.
Thanks, Liam. Good and nice concise report there. For the benefit of those who don't know, in the IRP there was lots of smaller mentions of schemes that would increase capacity potentially to a 7th or 8 route. Although a lot of that is highly dependent, as the IRP recognised, on a timetable where basically all the trains are running at the same speed and all stopping at the same place. So there is an issue around that. However, the joint work by Transport North East and Transport for the North is driving this forward. So I just partly want to say thank you to everybody. It's great when we work together. It's that idea of double devolution working in practice. And there was a specific request there, and I see that Heather's about to speak, but Heather and I and other local leaders work together cross-party. We've all arrived at a position where we'd very much like the Department of Transport to set up that East Coast Main Line Programme Board. The holding response was referenced. Could we get the Round North Committee support to say that that's a good idea, and to just give the DFT a shove and say, can they get that underway, rather than just having holding responses? If we're all working together, we'll get a better result. That's been the theme of everything we've said today.
Absolutely, thanks, Jamie. I think we'd always more than happy as a committee to endorse that and support it collectively. That shouldn't be a problem at all. Heather and then Susan.
Yes, just to follow on from Jamie, yes, we are working together, and I think that's very important. And just a couple of things in the report. Obviously, the timetable, the comment about reinstating the timetable after the last consultation, and obviously the urgency of the upgrade of the main line from York North. I think this, whatever we want to do with timetables, it really does depend on that. But yes, I support what Jamie's saying, and I think it's important that we do all work together on this.
Thanks, Heather. Susan?
Thanks. Yeah, and I'll start with positives, as we're in a positive frame of mind by the sounds of it. First of all, welcome the progress on behalf of York of the proposals to improve capacity on that northern approach to York Station, which will improve reliability. So pleased about that. Also, that London Bradford, which has been promised for many, many, many years. I just like to say welcome the joint work that has been going on across the industry to develop proposals in Bradford and Shipley, which will help with that commitment that was given 6, 7, 8 years ago even. So welcome that, and thank you very much for all the support from the industry to get that done. It's already been mentioned about the IRP and the fallout from that we don't have that scope yet from governments for what that is going to continue to have in it. We have a Leeds area board which has defined what we think those terms of reference should be. Obviously, I'd like everybody, and there are a number of people, companies on this call who are signed up to that, and I want to make sure that DFT is listening to that board, because this is local people defining what the scope should be, and paying due care and attention to that, and making sure that they agree with us on that, because just asking the right questions gets you to the right answer. If they start out wrong, we'll never get where we need to get to. And finally, where is RNP? Does anybody know? I keep asking that, I know, but we have been promised it since October 19, and it will actually, hopefully, we're hoping it includes quite a lot of small enhancements which will actually make quite a big difference to people in the short term. As Andrew was saying earlier, we need to get those short term things sorted as well. So has anybody heard of where RNP is, and is it likely to be announced to us when we meet on the 13th of June? Was it the week commencing 13th of June? Is that where they're going to be told about it?
Is that right, Chris? 13th of June?
Week commencing the 13th of June, I understand, yes.
Chair, can just
yes,
that isn't RNP. that'll be, we think we'll be able to look at the short-term timetable proposals for East Coast. So RNP, the latest update I had from the Department for Transport was it'll be published soon. I think that's probably the same as I reported last time, but as such, we've not seen a date for it. But Councillor Hinchcliffe is right, that is really important for the North. I think in some ways the blueprints plug some of the gap, because we are now setting out what infrastructure is needed in two big parts of the network, but it needs to be alongside RNP as well, which is the government pipeline.
I think on a very sort of serious point though as well, Susan, that's something we need to add to the list for Patrick to raise with the Rail Minister in his meeting that's forthcoming about the need for RNP to be published, which includes all of these small but crucial local schemes across the north of England. Oliver, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just a quick question about the Leeds area study, and just to ask if there was any sense of a timetable for the terms of reference, or dare I say a deadline for that.
I'm not aware of one. I believe they should be issued soon, but I've not heard any further on that.
Okay, soon. Won't go any further.
The board's being established, I understand, and it's something we need to drive DfT on to issue the terms of reference, because everyone's keen to see them. We need to say that they deliver what we want.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that picks up on Jamie's point earlier about how we've got to formally, as a committee, endorse and request that and push for that as well. Andy, do you want to come in?
Just to make a brief point, obviously to support Susan and Oliver, and just make a kind of broader point, Chair, which has kind of occurred to me more and more as the meeting's gone on, and that is the sense that we're just trying to get back to where we were pre-pandemic, that's now the mission for the railway in the north. And I didn't want to let this part of the meeting go without saying that cannot be acceptable, because we were promised at the start of the Northern Powerhouse vision that we would have, expanded service, an expanded timetable on the existing network, that we would have Northern Powerhouse Rail, that we would have HS2, and we would not be asked to choose between these different things. And what we're discussing here is a railway in decline, or holding where it was, which wasn't good enough. And I just think this committee needs to get back into sort of, we're almost like trying to cling on to what wasn't good enough, in terms of this discussion today. And I just didn't want to let this part of the meeting go without saying that, we've got to change the conversation here. We've got to get back to talking about a railway to support economic growth in all of the cities and regions represented on this call. And we're out of that territory completely now. And I just think we've got to, I think as Keith said, ministers have got to come back to these meetings and have the conversation with us. They were firm promises that were made to us that the railway would improve across the board, and that just seems to be gone. HS2 chopped in half, as we're just discussing, and Northern Powerhouse Rail, what is it now? No one on this call ever asked for the configuration that was dropped on us. So I just think we're in a real mess, it seems to me, Liam, and it's quite urgent, because the HS2 bill, phase 2B, as it affects us, is coming to Parliament. And so these debates are going to go live, if you like, the trade-offs here between everything that's happening. And I think that the vision the North was originally posed by George Osborne, promised in that original Northern Powerhouse speech, we are nowhere near any of that. And that was 8 years ago now. And instead we're having a conversation about how do we hold on to an inadequate, patchy, poor level of service. It's really not good enough. We have to reset the dial here, because I think we're not in the place where we need to be at all. Sorry, Chair, but I just think that's a reflection on this part of the meeting so far, and I just think it needs to be recognised.
No, don't apologise for speaking the truth in the slightest, Andy. That's the reality of the situation. I can see Martin's indicating, and it feels as if kind of there needs to be a very substantive item for the next board meeting that deals with the whole agenda, but more fundamentally is similar to kind of Keith's request, that we actually have ministerial attendance, ideally the Secretary of State, because actually kind of a lot of these promises need to be kind of fulfilled at the end of the day. No ifs, no buts. So, Martin, do you want to just respond accordingly?
There was just a couple of points I wanted to pick up, Chair, if I might. One is the various comments around the importance of the Leeds area study and having the terms of reference. Of course, in addition to this committee's support for making sure we move forward that quickly, we can, through the co-sponsor board, just make those points to our colleagues in the DFT. I think at an official level, they kind of understand the importance. I think it's a question of getting to a point where they can be shared publicly. So we can certainly take that back into the conversations, as indeed we always can on anything relating to the IRP. And that includes Mayor Driscoll's point about reinforcing the importance of actually getting some governance established to deal with that part. I think we can make those points complementing what this committee are making. I think the point that Mayor Burnham makes is actually in some ways touching on why we wanted to bring to you at the start of this the conversation around the strategic transport plan, because I think the whole point about that is being focused on what are we trying to deliver in terms of outcomes in terms of the economy, the environment and the society more generally. And of course, we saw as part of the work we did with the decarbonisation strategy that if we are to achieve our longer term ambition for the North of being decarbonised, then actually we have to achieve, as indeed our colleagues from the operators have touched on, an expanding railway that actually allows for choice and allows people to do things. And we will see when we publish the work we've done on transport related social exclusion that we will have a better understanding of the scale and the distribution of those challenges. So I think there is, Chair, a moment now to bring this enhanced evidence to actually reinvigorate and remind ourselves of that longer term ambition. It's absolutely right, as the committee have picked up on, that we work collectively to make sure that what happens in the short term is on a trajectory to achieving that. But I think the point that Mayor Burnham's making there about that reinvigorating ourselves and rediscovering, as some of our partners have said, that ambition is perhaps very timely and absolutely right. So let's bring that back to a conversation as part of the work on the transport plan at the next meeting.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's note that accordingly. If we can move on to the next items then. Item 7 is excluding the press and public. So if we can move the relevant motion in order to do that. James, if you can tell us once the recording has been